So one of the questions I get quite often from my students is how to get started with constructing details, because it is a quite tricky, complicated task, to be honest. And with many of those things in architecture, I really advise to have look at references, look at how other people have solved the issues that you have, and learn from built examples that hopefully have proven the test of time to a certain degree as well. So detailing quite often is a little bit of a research process. Many of the details are almost like a prototype, so you might have a very specific requirement as to how something needs to be done in your specific case, and you might never repeat that in the same way. Could be. Some of the details might be really standardized and you copy them again and again and again. But as I said, there's a little bit of research that can really, really help you in getting started and understanding constructing details. So I think it's I've got 5 little tips on how best to find suitable references and built examples that can help you to understand and progress your detailing. So the first one is the most obvious one. Of course, you can use a Google web search or any other search engine for that matter. Just typing in what kind of detail that you're looking for and see what pops up. But there's a bit of a limitation with that. I find a Google search doesn't necessarily give you the best examples. And one of the things that it really lacks is for you to understand the context. Where exactly are those details placed in the building? How do those buildings look like once they are finished? And particularly, you might not know from what country or what cultural context or climatic context those specific details are coming from, because they're very often presented in a very isolated way, so you lack that kind of these connections and wider understanding, wider information that you would need. So I would always take them with a bit of a grain of salt in what Google spits out, because details are very localized and you want to understand them holistically. But nonetheless, it might be a good start or an entry point just to get started as well. Also, with that in mind, keep in mind, and that sort of applies to the other tips as well, that the details, things change. We hopefully do become smarter. We learn as we go on. Our requirements are getting a bit tougher, a bit more stricter. So all of a sudden, we might have more insulation in our buildings, or we use different kinds of materials. Just think about the asbestos problems that we have these days. Back in the days that was common practice, but now we know better. So keep that in mind as well, and try to understand where that detail is from and of what time as well. The second and probably the most helpful source of finding references, I would say, is books and magazines. So particularly if you're at a university and hopefully you have access to a really good library that might have a specific architecture or construction section, have a look there at specific books. There's probably books that are simply dedicated to facades, or that are dedicated to a certain material. That might be timber constructions or brick constructions or whatever you're looking for. And there's also very specific magazines. I will add the links to some of those in the description. But a really popular source is Detail magazine. They are a German magazine, if I'm not wrong, and they do have English translations of their content as well. And they usually provide a really good overview of the buildings themselves, so you get an idea what you're actually looking at, and then they pick out a specific detail, or very often it's actually a complete facade section, and has really good annotations. And they're presented in a very consistent, coherent way. So that's a really good source to understand built examples. Detail magazines specifically, they quite often have themed issues. So there might be a magazine that's or an issue that's dedicated to facades. There might be an issue that's dedicated to designing for disassembly and all of those things. Generally, the buildings and the examples that they document and present are a bit more, I wouldn't say experimental, but they are like special buildings. They're not the average type of house that you see out in your neighborhood. So they might have really customized detail solutions that they show, but they are really, really good, especially if you're looking for something quite unique or a detail that you may not find in one of these more encyclopedia type of books that give you an overview of certain construction techniques. The third source that's quite helpful is to have a look at specific manufacturers. Many companies, many manufacturers offer downloadable details either as a PDF or sometimes even as a DXF or a DWG, so that's even vectorized details that you can load into your CAD program as well, and then you can play around and you change them or you can implement them into an existing detail as well. They are, when I'm talking about manufacturers, it's quite often things like a window detail, for instance. If you see the window in the back of my house, it's not a very modern window, but it would show the joints and how things are, the frames, how they are made, and all the different elements that go into it. Very often those details are quite complex. They're drawn at the very small scale, so that might be 1 to 5 details or even 1-to-1s. So they have almost too much information in them. So they might be too detailed for what you actually need. But nonetheless, they give you a good entry point in understanding how things are coming together, and you can use them as a starting point to then simplify the detail and include it into your facade or sectional drawings that you're working with. The fourth point is to have a look, and that might be a quite practical tip, to be honest, to have a look at your countries or cities' building codes and standards that are being published. So in certain places, I currently live in New Zealand, and they have a building code that specifies a lot of those details. Or thinking back at my time in Switzerland as well, we have what we call SIA. That's an organization that publishes standards and norms for certain things, and that could be standards about how to deal with water management in a flat roof or these sort of things. So having a look at those details, they are very often best practice details, and they are the recommended minimum of how you should be building and constructing a certain part of your building or your construction. Again, there's a bit of a caveat here. Given how slow some of those organizations operate and how much time it takes to implement change or implement new knowledge. So those standards and building codes might lag a little bit behind in comparison to what would now be considered best practice, just based on the latest knowledge that we have. Yeah. And then last but not least, if you're working in an architecture office already, maybe you're doing an internship, hopefully they have access. They might have their own library as well that you can utilize, but they might also have an internal library of a collection of details that they are using quite often within their buildings. So hopefully there's a reference building, something that they've already worked on, and you can have a look at the documentation of that specific project to learn on how they have done it previously, and there might even be a CAD file available where you can copy paste some of those details and then adjust those to your specific needs and requirements that you are facing with in your project as well. So that's a really, really good resource. And having said that, I think one of the tips on how to sort of develop your own practice as well is to keep your own library. So as you're coming across different detail solutions, different construction principles, they might not be helpful or applicable at this very point in time for your project. But it's good to keep a little digital library on your laptop or on an external hard drive as well. Maybe structure it according to materials or according to building elements, and just save them there for future reference. Who knows when they will come in handy again, particularly if you do find a resource that seems to be really easily approachable and understandable. So make a habit of saving those things. It'll save you a lot of time down the road. And also keep in mind that details are or constructing details, it's a very iterative process. So even though that you might find a specific reference that's really helpful and that's very similar to what your project is looking like, it might still take adaptation and implementation and working and making things fit into your specific context. So it's good to have a base, work with it, adjust it, and go on. And I will have a bit of a more in-depth chat about how that process of creating those details for a project looks like in an architecture office environment, what kind of stages to expect when you go through this kind of work. And yeah, it's just maybe to end it off, this video off with, it's really a reminder that we can hardly ever just copy paste. As I mentioned in the beginning, details are almost like a prototype. All the requirements are really unique and quite special and for your specific need and for the requirements that you have in your project. So we have to, again, we have to do a little bit of research, and we have to dig in a little bit and really work and construct and figure things out. But those things will become easier as you go on, and it's actually a quite rewarding and really fun process, I would say. So hopefully those tips help you a little bit in getting started, breaking that ice in the beginning, and just, having something that you can lean back on and use as a reference for your own work. Yeah. Good luck with all of that.